the key. The dragon keeps it around his neck. To slay the dragon, use the magic sword.
Hello and welcome to Franchise and Lows, Dragon's Lair and Space Ace. I'm Stuart Jipp, as usual, and I'm talking about the entire both series here, I guess. Originally developed by Advanced Microcomputer Systems, published by Cinematronics, these Laserdisc games that span off into a bunch of, well, decidedly not Laserdisc games. But these are very, Dragon's Lair especially is a very well-known, very famous American arcade game. It's quite infamous in a sense because it only tends to be mentioned as the poster child for style over substance, a game that looks spectacular but doesn't really necessarily play so well. I'll talk about that when I get into it, because in a way I don't really feel like that's the point, or to be more clear, that really is the point, so it's not really that much of a criticism, I would argue. But we'll get to it. It's a game that's been kept consistently available for many years across almost all formats, so if you want to play the arcade Dragon's Lair games, you almost certainly have a machine where you can do so. They're on the Switch, they're definitely on Steam. They might be on PS4, PS5, I don't know, I haven't checked. They were on PS3 and they were on DVD as well, and Blu-ray. So, let's get straight into the first game. Okay, now this is the original, and the original game, of course, was a Laserdisc arcade game. I don't believe it had the readouts you're seeing here, and it certainly didn't have button prompts. You had to basically... there were screen flashes, but I wouldn't call them especially reliable. You basically watch this cartoon play out and react to what you're seeing, essentially, but you have very little reaction time to hit, say, left, right, or the sword attack button, which I believe is the only button. It's... The Don Bluth sort of studio animation is really, beautiful and movie quality stuff, pretty much inarguably. As a game, it's extremely lacking, as it really doesn't have any inputs besides what we would now call QuickTime events, QTEs. But there's no denying that it's still interesting, it's still visually attractive. There are lots of very striking, memorable set pieces. But playing the actual thing is just sort of you got to do it for historical, purposes. You need to know what you were dealing with, but it's still not really a game as we would understand it nowadays, or at least accept it nowadays. Even modern FMV games are based more on deduction and thought. This is just more or less rote memorization. Of course, in these modern versions, the memorization factor is reduced because, as I mentioned, you do get prompts. It tells you what to do. But, if anything, the addition of those prompts makes it feel even more kind of workmanlike. While it's a lot fairer that way, it's not quite so dynamic, I suppose. But really, there's no way to, air quotes, fix Dragon's Lair. It is what it is. So, it's worth watching for the animation, it's worth playing through to see it. It's probably not worth spending an enormous amount of money on, but you have to be aware that if you're getting this game, you're getting it for sort of historical purposes, for understanding what it is, rather than actually playing it for enjoyment. Of course, your mileage may vary, and maybe I'll get some people in the comments saying that actually Dragon's Lair is fucking great, but they're wrong. and I'm right, as usual. As you'd anticipate for the time, the home ports of Dragon's Lair didn't really capture the game. How could they? How could anyone expect them to? Later systems, such as the Mega CD and other CD systems, had, decent full video versions of them. But as far as ports to sort of home computers go, it's either completely different games or, for example, the Game Boy Color port, which I'm showing now, which really is a remarkable sort of achievement, though, it's still not really all that fun. The more contemporary Spectrum port, they did their level best, arguably, to try and capture the vibe of Dragon's Lair, but there's constant faffing with the tape. It's essentially a minigame compilation with awkward controls and really mainly ugly graphics, unfortunately. The Commodore 64 version is marginally better. It's got sound, which goes a long way, and it's maybe a touch smoother as well, but it still stinks. I still can't recommend it. There's some decent sprite art in places, but this is very much a no-go sort of zone. I don't know what else I guess what would have been better is if they had really properly done a full adaptation and sort of gone, well, hang the full animation, we'll make a smaller game that's nonetheless more appropriate for the Spectrum, for the microcomputers. But that's not what they did, and we can't really go back and make them. Can we? While the original arcade Dragon's Lair came out in '83, the Spectrum, etc. ports didn't really hit till '86. While there was a really not great EGA DOS version of Dragon's Lair, which I'm showing now, the follow-up was released in '87, and it's Escape from Singer's Castle. It's not really Dragon's Lair 2. It's sort of more the scenes that weren't in the first one, with a few new bits and bobs. And the PC version is pretty solid-ish, way better than the first one was. Still not exactly a great game, but it has some kind of value. The home computer versions, once again, so as in the ZX Spectrum, etc., are kind of horrible. Again, mostly scenes from the original game, but that weren't in the first port, but reinterpreted for the sort of host machines. Now, the Spectrum version, again, is sort of horrible. There's some interesting visuals to it, but it doesn't make up for the gameplay in any respect. The Commodore 64 one isn't much better, but the use of music and the superior visuals go a long way to making it more palatable. There's the rolling ball sequence is really interesting looking in that game, in my opinion. I mean, it's one of the most interesting looking sequences in the original game, but here I just think it's got kind of a cool vibe to it. But overall, again, this isn't great, unfortunately. Released for the Air Nintendo Entertainment System in 1990 is, again, named Dragon's Lair. A really infamous, difficult game, not really in a good way. I suppose there's not really a good way to be infamous, is there? it does adapt sequences from the arcade original, but in a side-scrolling sort of manner, and it does so with such contempt and cruelty that honestly I find it difficult not to appreciate it on a really twisted level, because it's almost like they went to adapt what is a really kind of unfair arcade game, and they thought, well, we better make the NES game as unfair as possible too, why not? So they did, but I'd argue that because the arcade game is fairly rote, left, right, up, down, fire memorization, and the NES game is just pitched in such a way that every possible obstacle is potential death. There are no, I mean this, without exaggeration, there aren't any gimmies. There's nothing that's easy to get past without getting hit in this game. And getting hit is, more often than not, instant death here. It really is truly cruel. To indulge one of my hobby horses, I'm actually pretty amazed that the VTuber Inugami Korone completed this on the stream, even if it did take 1,000 hours, as is her wont to do. But like I said, no, this is a terrible, horrible playing experience, but it's one of those that feels very much by design, so it's difficult to really hate it, I think. If it felt sloppy, which I don't think it does, then I would understand despising this game, but because it feels like it was designed specifically to elicit anger and hate, I have to give it some props for doing a good job of that. Now, here's a weird one. In 1991, Dragon's Lair: The Legend was released for the Game Boy, and it's a fairly adequate platformer that has a very microcomputery ZX Spectrum-y feel to it, and for good reason, because it's actually a port of the Spectrum game Roller Coaster, astonishingly. How many Spectrum ports were there on the Game Boy? I can only think of this and Minor 2049er, which I don't think is really a Spectrum game per se anyway. It's just kind of a wild thing to have happened. So yeah, they took this game Roller Coaster, based around a theme park, and they reskinned it into a Dragon's Lair game. And, you know, they did a pretty good job of it, apart from all of the ancient Egyptian sort of aesthetics, which isn't really Dragon's Lair at all. It's only when you get into certain screens that it even resembles it. I like it because I happen to like games like this. Most people will hate it. I've seen videos online of, you know, Americans saying that it's the worst game I've ever played, like they do, you know, because they've only played about 4 games ever. I'm not bitter. Anyway, yeah, Dragon's Lair: The Legend. Hard to call it good. Easy for me personally to be fascinated by it. I think that the original Roller Coaster was actually better because it has that awesome Spectrum color scheme going on. And, you know, you expect the game feel on a Game Boy game to not really be quite so bitty as this is. But, no, it's good, it's interesting, it's an interesting piece of the Dragon's Lair puzzle, and there's plenty more of those to come, I can assure you.
Kidnapped? By definitely kidnapped again? Idiot! Don't cough! You better fight to marry a frog. Dead! Cold dead! You can run, boy Bruce. You cannot hide.
Dragon's Lair II Time Warp hit the arcades in 1991, and it's essentially more of the same, though honestly the animation is even more dynamic, even smoother, even better. The set pieces are faster moving and more interesting. There's less of the sort of repetition and mirroring from the first game. There's some stuff in this that I think it just looks absolutely astonishing, frankly. It's utterly remarkable. The trade-off is that as much as this is a far more fast and furious and pacey game, it's actually quite a lot harder even than the first game, which is really hard. There's a lot going on here, a lot to look at. It's even more worth watching than the first one, and maybe a slightly less horny than the first one in some respects, although I guess considering some of the stuff you see in this game, that's not really true at all. It was also ported to DOS like the first game was, but the DOS port here is a lot better. It's lost a lot of the game's colour depth, but it's a pretty decent little effort. There's a fair number of scenes missing, but the animation is surprisingly solid, surprisingly strong. It's still not particularly fun, as neither is the original game, but they made a stronger effort here, and things get kind of additionally odd following this. Okay, in 1993, Dragon's Lair III, The Curse of Mordred was released for home computers, Atari ST, DOS, Amiga, etc. It's very much a follow-up to the previous port of Time Warp, and what it kind of does is it adapts sequences that weren't in the first game for presumably space reasons. But it has a sort of a fair few new sequences as well, which I believe were based on footage that was cut from the first game for time or whatever, or for I don't know why it was cut. I have no idea. Someone will know. This is a very well chronicled series. But this is another acceptable effort. It pretty impressive looking. The animation could be smoother, the colour depth isn't up to much, but it's about as good as you could expect. The DOS version seems to be slightly better than the Amiga version because the Amiga has a lot of hitches and pauses, but that might just be the version that I saw. It's possible that maybe with the superior Amiga that wouldn't be an issue, or maybe it's a disc loading thing, I'm not sure. And it's that kind of vague fact-free commentary that brings people in droves to my YouTube channel. In 1993, for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, Dragon's Lair was released, and it's another platform game, as was the NES game, but more of an adaptation than a port, so to speak. Honestly, it's probably the best of the games we've had yet in terms of playability, but that's still not to say it's any kind of a hidden masterpiece or anything. It's fine. It's quite good looking, in my opinion. There are some... the colours, the use of colour and effects is quite nice, but there are some really dreadful sprites in this game. It's a Data East, which, as much as I've enjoyed some of their games, to my mind says kind of jank, and there is a degree of that in the sprite work here, in my opinion. Like, for example, the sort of iconic Dragon's Lair snake will turn up, but it's kind of frozen in place, and there's lots of them because it was just kind of like, well, that's an enemy from the game, let's make that an enemy sprite, so it loses some of its impact, though it does turn up as a boss as well. It's just still more or less a still image that sways from left to right using mode 7, the SNES mode 7. There's use of other sprites from the other images from the game like that, such as the rolling balls you'll encounter in straight side-scrolling areas. The Black Knight on the chessboard will turn up, and Singe the dragon's head with tiny little wings will turn up, and it looks really hacky, and it's really annoying every time because he has this quite irritatingly wide flight pattern that means you're always having to wait for him. So you're more likely to just tank a hit just to move things along, which is not ideal. You can throw weapons, and you have your sword, and the sword is quite satisfying to use because you can... you hold it to sort of unsheath it and ready your swing, and then you release it to, well, swing. And when you time it right, because it's more powerful than anything in the game, it can more or less kill things that take a bunch of items to throw, usually, to kill. Well, that was a good sentence. You can use it to kill enemies that take a lot of thrown items to kill normally, you get it. So it does feel pretty good to use. There's a lot of stages, and it has an interesting sort of Metroidvania-ish structure, although it's more like something like Mario World, where there's more than one exit to an area, and they'll take you to different parts of the castle. It's pretty cool in that respect. It kind of works. I don't think it's a great game, but I would really struggle to call it particularly bad. It's basically fine in my opinion. It was also ported to the Mega Drive with the usual sort of, less colours, fewer colours I should say. The game feel is arguably slightly smoother on that version, but there's not much in it, and it does a lot of things with dithering that the SNES version does with transparencies, as you'd again expect. There are some other small differences that aren't worth getting into, and to be honest, I didn't finish it on the proto form because I just went, well, this is the same game more or less. I don't know if there's some completely exclusive final boss or something, but I'd be surprised if it wasn't basically the same thing in general. And, it's fun. Bit of exploring, bit of light puzzle solving, and a nice sense of scale to the thing. So yeah, not a bad game at all, pretty cool. 9-year gap now until we get to Dragon's Lair 3D, Return to the Lair, which was released on PS2 and GameCube and PC and possibly Xbox, I forget. It's what you'd sort of expect at the time, really. It's a essentially 3D platformer stroke hack and slash game. I'm going to say it's not a million miles away from Dark Souls. It's not very challenging, but it has the same sense of sort of foreboding as you explore the castle. Scenes from the original Laserdisc have been expanded into, 3D platforming stages, and honestly, I kind of dug it. I thought it was a lot of fun. Easily the best of the Dragon's Lair games that I've played after the SNES one. This is the first one that felt like, a real coherent effort at a game. and that's not shade to throw at the Laserdisc one. Again, it is what it is. But this is a real solid 3D platformer with pretty good level design, pretty decent seeming production values. Lots of fun sort of secrets and stuff to find. I'll tell you what game it reminded me of, and this is not going to sound like a recommendation. It reminded me of the Futurama game in that it's punching well above what you'd expect from its license, because Dragon's Lair is kind of a somewhat unfairly, considering the context, a watchword for kind of games that look great but don't play that well, as if that was ever not really, the point. But no, Dragon's Lair 3D, a lot of fun, lots going on, and the cel-shaded look means that it still looks pretty decent. I've got to draw some attention to the opening and closing cutscenes, which are new 2D cutscenes that look, honestly, they look absolutely superb, and the princess is just as horny as ever, if not more horny, if not hornier, as if that were ever even possible. But no, if you think that you've rinsed sort of all the 3D platformers, because I never see anyone talk about this one, and it really is just a perfectly cromulent game. So yeah, best game on the list. I'd probably give it like an 8, which is, not top marks, but it's good, very good, well above average. Good camera, good visuals, good stage design, and while, like I mentioned, it does adapt the sequences from the original game, it doesn't slavishly adapt them in a way that would make no sense in a 3D platformer. Everything is very well thought out. It's good. It deserves better than it got. And one thing I'm going to mention, because I couldn't find any footage of it at all. I'm not convinced it's real, but apparently Digital Leisure, who either owned or used to own the rights to this game, to these games, put out a DVD of a new game called Dragon's Lair III, following up from Time Warp, and it was just footage of this game being played, but you pressed buttons like you did in the original Dragon's Lair. So essentially, you're watching a Let's Play, and every so often you would do a button command. What a stupid load of old shit. I wish I could find footage of it so I could show it to you, but unfortunately I just couldn't. Seriously though, try and imagine how crap that would be. Jesus Christ.
You cannot win.
There's Bor's ship.
Close, Ming Ming.
Now, because this episode is a twofer, you're getting Space Ace as well, but don't worry, there are many times fewer Space Ace games than there are Dragon's Lair games. It just doesn't have the love that Dragon's Lair has, arguably, inexplicably. The original 83 Space Ace, again, much like Dragon's Lair, is this Don Bluth animation Laserdisc game that requires you to pay attention to your environment as you watch a cartoon and hit the right commands at the right times to avoid horrible death. The aim here is that you are this little kid called Dexter who can transform into this big hench, full-arsed space hero called Space Ace, and he has to rescue again a princess, as you do. The animation here is, again, arguably even stronger than Dragon's Lair. It's got some really remarkable, nice-looking early 80s visuals, very much theatrical quality. It's a strong effort from Bluth Studio, but then again, so was Dragon's Lair and so was Time Warp. Again, it's not really that fun. It's more fun to watch than it is to play, and it's a little bit less coherent than Dragon's Lair, in my opinion. It's way faster paced, and there's way more stuff going on, probably for the better, but overall, just another, too difficult and too confusing, and not what you would conventionally call a video game, but it has great animation and it has value therein.
You cannot win.
There's For's ship.
In 1990, Space Ace was, air quotes, ported to the PC on DOS via a company called ReadySoft. I say ported because it's 2 minutes long. Like, yeah, it's all memorization, but 2 minutes of gameplay is astonishing. Okay, let's be generous. 2 minutes and about 10 seconds, but it's astonishing. Animation's nice. The backgrounds are a bit of a step up from the Dragon's Lair port, but 2 minutes of gameplay is just, it's basically nothing. It's embarrassing. And it's only got, as a result, only a few of the scenes from the main game. It's not even, I would say, not even really worth talking about. You'll find out what happened with those other scenes shortly, but this version is just completely incoherent. Like, Dexter will change to Space Ace, to Ace, I should say, and back and forth, like, with completely no explanation, because those scenes have been cut. It's just a very poor imitation of the game. That's not to say it's a poor effort, because I don't know anything about game development, so maybe this was genuinely all that they could achieve with the limitations of tech at the time. But yeah, if you want to play Space Ace, don't play this version. Play one of the many newer versions of the game that have the full experience.
Isn't he adorable?
Call me Ace, huh?
You cannot win.
There was a game called Space Ace 2 Borf's Revenge, released for DOS in 1991, so many years later. It's only kind of a sequel. It adapts some of the scenes from this game, and there is some new animation, some of which is actually really quite cool, and it's of similar quality to Syndra's Revenge and the Curse of Mordred, which we saw earlier. Nothing to write home about, but it's okay.
Oh, Dexter!
Call me Ace.
You cannot win.
Okay, and finally in 1994 we got Space Ace for the SNES. It's an admirably faithful adaptation of the game into quasi-side-scrolling format, but it's also kind of unpleasant to actually play. About as unpleasant as Ace actually is as a character visually. He's just really unappealing, and he's got this kind of dickhead laugh. But anyway, that's besides the point. What you get here is more or less every sequence from the game, the original arcade game, represented as a belt scroller sort of thing, really. Where you have about as much leeway here as you did in the arcade game, maybe like a touch more, because pretty much everything is a one-hit kill, so it is still more or less a matter of luck and rote memorization to get past. The game's also constantly shifting in styles. Like, you'll go from quasi 3D belt-scrolly platformer with slow jumping to a sort of space flight top-down rotating mode 7 thing that goes on for too long but isn't completely horrible. As in the arcade, you'll switch from Dexter to Ace when it's time to start using your gun, but that's all sort of very much sort of automated as well. So it is an interesting adaptation, I would say. It's not an entirely terrible game, but it's not particularly worth your time either. If you bought this for SNES back in the day and you'd paid like £50 for it, then I think you'd either be gutted or you'd be me and you'd make yourself like it and you'd finish it like multiple times. But no, this isn't the greatest of swan songs for this video. I wish it had ended with, I don't know, Space Ace 3D that was as good as Dragon's Lair 3D, but unfortunately, as of yet, to my knowledge, no such thing exists.
You cannot win.
Okay, so that's Dragon's Lair and Space Ace. I've been wanting to do those for a little while. I know they're a little bit different from my usual sort of fare, but I hoped that I'd be able to cover them. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it as a franchise in loads, because it's not like me to do multiple versions of the same game unless there are significant differences. I guess there were here, but it's still a little bit off-brand, so I was thinking of doing this as Video World Presents instead. But then I realised I haven't done one of those for probably 3 years, and no one's even going to understand the distinction between the branding. I think I only ever did one Video World Presents anyway, so God knows, you know. Anyway, the point is, yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and as I always say, I'm hoping to do more videos soon. I have recorded some new Video World / Jam stuff, and I've got lots of Franchise and Lows episodes about half done that I plan to finish one of these days. And I'm going to tease one of them, I guess, at the end of this video? Why not? Thanks.
Space Ace will appear on the monitor. And presto!
I'm now on videotape, huh?
Oh, I love space and science fiction.
There's also this weird Dr. Frank and Joe and Mac and Dragon's Lair crossover game called On the Tiles, but it sucks, so who cares?
Suits ought to go